This is a video record of our Baltic cruise on the Regal Princess from July 27th to August 7th, 2017. This is part 2. In this part we visit Tallinn, Estonia, St. Petersburg, Russia, Helsinki, Finland, and Stockholm, Sweden. In the part 1 video, we visited Copenhagen, Denmark on July 26th, Oslo, Norway on July 28th, and Berlin, Germany on July 30th. After leaving the port of Warnemünde and sailing all day on July 31st, we arrived at our next port of call, Tallinn, Estonia, on August 1st. Just to orient you, Tallinn is divided into two parts: the upper old town set on a hill and the lower old town below it. Estonia is now a free country, but it was controlled by the Soviet Union from the end of the Second World War until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. After leaving the ship, it was only a 3/4 of a mile walk to the entrance of Lower Old Town. This structure is part of the old city wall that went all the way around Tallinn. A short distance into the Lower Old Town, we saw the former headquarters of the KGB, that is, the Russian Secret Police. The building is now a KGB museum. In this picture, I am pointing to what was originally a basement window. The KGB had removed the window and filled in the space with bricks. That was done to silence the screams of the people they were torturing inside. My plan was to walk through the Lower Old Town to the Upper Old Town and explore it first. Because of the research I had done of Tallinn before leaving home, I was able to easily find the entrance to the Upper Old Town. In medieval times, there was a heavy wooden door at this entrance. The more privileged residents of the Upper Old Town would close the door every night so that the peasants in the Lower Old Town would not bother them. Before we made our way through the entrance of the Upper Old Town, I looked up and saw this area with people taking pictures. I immediately knew that this was the location of the Kotuatsa viewing platform in the Upper Old Town. I had learned about the platform during my research and had tagged it as a must-see site. From there you can get the best view of Tallinn. We passed through the short entrance tunnel and walked up this ramp to reach the Upper Old Town. At the top, the first thing we saw was the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, built in 1900. Here are some shots of the inside of the cathedral. Immediately opposite the cathedral is the Estonian Parliament. Down the street a couple of blocks was St. Mary's Cathedral. It seemed that every restaurant in Tallinn had an outside eating area with umbrellas, and each umbrella had the word Saku on it. I learned that Saku is the name of the Estonian national beer. Down this road is the viewing platform we had seen from below. The view from the platform did not disappoint. We were even able to see the Regal Princess. As we were leaving the platform, we saw the local police talking with this tourist. We couldn't hear what it was about, but it did make us a little nervous. After seeing the view from the platform, we passed by the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral again and started down from the Upper Old Town via a different route than we took to get up there. One of the first things we saw was this section of the old city wall. In this picture, I am standing in front of one of the towers that were part of the city wall. I am drinking a Coke Zero. For whatever reason, almost no one sells Diet Coke in Europe. After a short walk, we arrived at St. John's Church at the far end of something called Freedom Square. After a little more walking, we passed by the St. Nicholas Church. A few blocks further brought us to the Town Hall Square, which has been a marketplace and the center of Tallinn since the Middle Ages. On one side of the square was the Tallinn City Hall. At this point we were getting hungry, and again my research paid off because I had read about a great restaurant just around the corner from the town city hall. The restaurant was called the Pepper Sack. We got there at the tail end of their breakfast time. After some deliberation, we got really brave and ordered breakfast. While we were waiting, it was fascinating to watch the multitudes of people walking by. When they brought the food, it included the famous Estonian black bread. It was delicious, and so were the breakfasts. After lunch, we visited something called the Sweater Wall, which is an outdoor merchant event along the inside of the old city wall. They sell only sweaters and other knitted garments. Just a few steps from the Sweater Wall was Catherine's Passage, which is the oldest street in Tallinn. You access the passage through this short tunnel. It is thought to have been built more than 700 years ago. The passage contains a restaurant and a few shops. This shop had a door that was maybe 5 feet high. It was a shop that sold truly unique dolls. After we visited Catherine's Passage, we followed the city wall for a short distance until we got to the place people can access the top of the city wall. For a small fee, of course. Being the brave guy that I am, I volunteered to make the climb while Robin stayed on the street below. I entered through this door, paid the fee, and climbed up to the top of the wall. This was the view I got from the top. There was a flower market right outside the city wall that I knew about, so we started walking there. Just before we arrived, we saw this McDonald's restaurant. We hadn't seen one all day, and I had started to think that Tallinn was the one place that McDonald's hadn't reached. I was wrong. The flower market had the most beautiful flowers we had seen since Oslo. While we were looking at the flowers, we couldn't help notice these kids on the roof of the flower market. I wondered how they got up there, and then I looked to the left. I saw that the street met the hill behind the market, so I walked there and got this shot of the roof of the flower market. By this time we had seen everything in Tallinn that I had planned to see, so we started to make our way back to the ship. Across the street from where we had lunch was this restaurant/souvenir shop. Robin went in there to look around, and I went across the street to this shop selling amber, the gold-colored rock for which Tallinn is famous. Robin didn't find anything, but I bought this tiny sailing ship made out of amber. After shopping, we walked a short distance back to the city hall. It had a small gift shop, so we went inside. It was interesting to see that the threshold of the city hall was worn down after centuries of foot traffic. Next, we walked across the town hall square and stopped at this outdoor restaurant and had a couple of Cokes. Oh, I mean Coke Zeros. After leaving Tallinn, we were about halfway back to the ship when Robin tripped and fell at this spot. Luckily, she only got a couple of bruises. The camera was fine except for a light filter that was screwed onto the tip of the lens. We walked the rest of the way to the ship and relaxed for the rest of the afternoon. The ship left Tallinn at about 6 o'clock. That night we watched the best sunset of the entire cruise. Here are some of the pictures Robin got of it. This was a small ferry that had left Tallinn about the same time we did. It was soon lost in the darkness. After leaving Tallinn, we sailed all night, and by the next morning, August 2nd, we had arrived at our next port of call, St. Petersburg, Russia. We would spend 2 full days and 1 night in St. Petersburg. We docked in their cruise terminal number 1. Our ship was in the same spot as the ship in the foreground with the yellow smokestack. We had purchased a 2-day excursion to see the sights of St. Petersburg for $450 per person. That was expensive, but the only other way to see St. Petersburg would be to get a visa prior to the cruise, which usually takes months. This lady was our Russian tour guide. Her name was Natalia. She spoke excellent English and was very knowledgeable about Russian history and the sights we would be seeing. We met her on the dock next to the ship at 8 o'clock that first morning. We boarded our bus and started off. That first day was cold, overcast, with off and on rain. From the ship, we drove about an hour to our first stop of the day, the Peterhof Palace. The palace was built in the early 1700s by Peter the Great, aka Peter I, who was the first real Tsar of Russia. When he built the palace, he was trying to compete with Louis XIV of France and his Palace of Versailles. We started our visit to the Peterhof Palace with a tour of its interior. After the tour, we were taken out to the area directly behind the palace, in particular to an area called Statuary Terrace. This is the most photographed area of the palace. As you can probably tell, it had started to rain. Next, we walked around the corner to the gardens in front of the palace. We had been given about a half an hour to explore the gardens on our own. At the end of the half hour, we started back to the Statuary Terrace. When we arrived, we were happy to see that they had started the water fountain show. A few minutes later, they added music. After the water show, we reboarded our bus and started back to St. Petersburg. As we were driving, our tour guide told us that during World War II, the Peterhof Palace suffered major damage. To give you a better idea of how much damage, here is a side-by-side comparison of the palace after the war and the palace of today. On the drive back to St. Petersburg, we passed an unexpected sight, a Shell gas station. Before we got to St. Petersburg, we stopped at this roadside diner. The tables were set very nicely and everything seemed clean and classically Russian. Among the usual dishes and water carafes, there were glasses of vodka and samples of caviar. Robin had never eaten caviar before, so she tried it. She hated it. One of our fellow passengers chug-a-lugged a shot of vodka like it was water. Then they brought the main course. It was a meal fit for a king, or maybe a queen. How about a hairbrush salesman from Peoria? After that Russian feast, we were driven to our next destination, the Peter and Paul Cathedral, which is in the heart of St. Petersburg. This is the burial place for all the czars of Russia. The entrance is to the left of the cathedral. As you will see, every square inch of the interior of this cathedral is decorated, much of it in gold leaf. This is the tomb of Peter the Great. Again, he was the one who had the Peterhof Palace built. These are the tombs of the second and third Tsars of Russia. It was about 3 o'clock when we finished seeing the Peter and Paul Cathedral. Upon leaving, we immediately got caught up in a St. Petersburg traffic jam. That surprised me because I didn't think there were enough cars in any Russian city to cause a traffic jam. We inched our way through the traffic jam and finally arrived at our last destination of the day, the Yusupov Palace. Its only claim to fame is its connection to the murder of a man called Grigory Rasputin, who in 1916 became the spiritual advisor and confidant to Tsar Nicholas, the last Russian Tsar. The murder took place in the basement of the palace. They took us down to that basement where they have this diorama showing the moments just before the murder took place. By late afternoon, we were taken back to the ship. We rested up and then showered. Before we went to dinner, we went out on our balcony and shot this picture of 2 other cruise ships in the terminal that day. The ship on the left is the Royal Caribbean Serenade of the Seas, and the other is a Viking ship. It was weird going to sleep that night, knowing that for all intents and purposes we were prisoners on the ship. That was because if we had tried to leave the ship without visas, we would be in big trouble with a capital T. We woke up the next day, August 3rd, anxious to see more sights in St. Petersburg. Unfortunately, I woke up with a sore throat and was sick for the rest of the trip. Undaunted, we got off the ship and met our lady tour guide. Our first activity that day was to go on a cruise around the canals of St. Petersburg. The tour was quite extensive and took about an hour and a half. Just after we started the cruise, this man started running alongside of the boat. Soon he ran ahead to the next bridge and waved at us until we crossed under the bridge. Then he ran ahead to the next bridge and waved, and then on to the next, and so on. Robin finally got this close-up of him. He followed us for most of the cruise, then he just left. At this point, we started to pass the Peter and Paul Cathedral, the same one we had seen the day before. The following is a video clip I shot as we passed it. The lady talking is our tour guide.
And on the right you see Peter and Paul Cathedral, you see the belfry. I remind you that the belfry is 122 meters tall, the tallest structure of the city until the skyscraper was built. The steeple is 40 meters tall.
The following are some examples of the pictures Robin took during the cruise. I will indicate the names of the buildings if I know them. One of the last places we passed was the Hermitage Museum. We were taken there after the cruise. This is an aerial view of the Hermitage. The river view of the Hermitage is at the bottom of this picture. This is the front of the Hermitage. Now let me turn the view around and go to the ground view. The Hermitage Museum was the jewel of the entire two-day excursion. It is a world-class museum of art and culture, and it was something I had always wanted to see. Up until the Russian Revolution, it was the winter palace of the Russian Tsars. Because we were on this special tour, we were able to bypass the lines of people waiting to get in. That being said, once we got inside, our tour guide, Natalia, rushed us through the Hermitage like we were in a race. This was the entryway into the Hermitage. After that was the grand staircase. Now I will show the pictures Robin took of the rooms we saw on the tour. I will give the names of the rooms if I know them. The first room we saw was the chapel of the Hermitage. Like most Soviet religious edifices, gold leaf was applied with abandon. This obviously is the throne room. This was one of the many rooms containing famous works of art. This was one of the two huge urns we saw there. Each was probably 5 feet tall. This was a copy of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. After seeing the Hermitage, it was time for lunch. As we were walking to the restaurant, we saw the Astoria Hotel. Our guide told us that during World War II, Hitler boasted that he would spend some time there after Germany defeated Russia. That never happened. When we arrived at the restaurant, we were pleasantly surprised. It looked like we were still in the Hermitage. As it turns out, the restaurant used to be a post office. The food there was much better than the day before. They even had a song and dance performance in traditional Russian costumes. After lunch, we were taken to St. Isaac's Cathedral, which had the most beautiful interior of any church we saw during the entire cruise. It rivals St. Peter's in Rome. The last place we visited was the Church of the Savior on Spilled Blood. This was built on the spot where Tsar Alexander II was assassinated in 1881. The church was never used to hold any religious services. It was and is used for memorial services. More recently, it has been serving as a museum. Like the Peter and Paul Museum, every square inch of the walls and ceiling are covered in artwork. The main difference here is that all of the artwork here is made from tiny mosaic tiles. Here is a sample of an artwork in the church. Now let's look at a close-up section of the piece. Creating the artwork in this style was the reason it took 24 years to build this church. Now here's a video clip of the interior. After seeing the church, we were driven back to the ship. While Robin rested, I went out on deck and took a few last-minute photos of St. Petersburg. In the distance, you can see construction going on. They were building something called Park 300, which would celebrate the 300th anniversary of St. Petersburg. This is how it looks now. We cruised overnight and arrived at our next port of call, Helsinki, Finland, on August 4th. After we woke up, we looked outside and saw that it was raining. No, it was pouring. Fortunately, we had not purchased an excursion in this port. In spite of the rain, we bought tickets for a hop-on, hop-off bus and rode past many stops to the Lutheran Cathedral. We got off there because the rain had stopped. This is inside of the cathedral. Quite a difference from the ones in St. Petersburg, right? After seeing the cathedral, we caught another bus back to the ship. When we got off the bus, we had to walk through ankle-deep water to reach the ship. Luckily, both of us had brought a backup pair of shoes. In place of the videos and still pictures that we were not able to get, I wish to present a short virtual tour of the places we had intended to see with pictures I got off the internet. This is how the cathedral looks on a sunny day. This is the market square, which is their huge flea market. After that, we would have seen the Central Railway Station. Next, we would have stopped at the Rock Church, which was carved out of solid rock. This is the inside of the Rock Church. The Sibelius monument honors the Finnish composer Jan Sibelius, shown on the right. The sculpture is meant to represent musical notes. And finally, we would have seen the Russian Uspensky Cathedral. Here is its interior. It was really disappointing that we had missed seeing so much in Helsinki. All we could do now was to hope that the weather would be better at our next port of call, Stockholm. After leaving Helsinki, we cruised all night. The next morning, August 5th, we found out that high winds around Stockholm had forced our ship to stop at a place called Nynäshamn, about 35 miles south of Stockholm. As you can see, it wasn't exactly a mecca for sightseeing. To further complicate matters, our ship was too large to dock there, so it had to anchor a few miles offshore. Doing that meant that passengers had to be shuttled to and from shore on one of the ship's several lifeboats, which took about half an hour each way. After we got on shore, we caught a bus to Stockholm, which took about an hour. So factoring in the time for the return trip, we ended up losing about 3 hours of sightseeing time just getting to and from Stockholm, which was really frustrating. Like the other cities we had visited on this cruise, Stockholm has a new town and an old town. The old town is called Gamla, which is a small island in the middle of the river that flows through Stockholm. The bus dropped us off across the river from Gamla. The weather couldn't have been better. It was sunny and warm, and the wind had stopped blowing. We crossed the bridge into Gamla and started exploring. We went straight to a very old and narrow street named Västerlänggatan, which is Stockholm's version of the Portobello Road in London. It is a collection of shops and eateries about a quarter of a mile long. Apparently, the Swedes love Nutella. We saw several restaurants with signs advertising the fact that they offered that spread. This place should have been called Nutella Land. There were many, many souvenir stores that seemed to carry every souvenir ever made related to Stockholm. There were also many jewelry stores. Robin stopped at this one and treated herself to a couple of necklaces. At around noon, we walked down this little side street and ate sandwiches sitting on these steps. We had brought the sandwiches from the ship. After lunch, we continued down Västerlänggatan and stopped to have dessert at a little restaurant. We next walked to the Gamla Grand Square. It is called Stortorget. Yes, that is the correct pronunciation. These green, red, and yellow buildings are the most photographed in Stockholm. I tried to make myself the most photographed person in Stockholm, but I didn't make it. Next, we walked to this little church whose primary claim to fame is this statue of St. George and the Dragon. From there, we walked a short distance to see the object on that brown box. It is a tiny metal sculpture called the Iron Boy. The sculpture is described in very few tourist guides and is therefore considered a secret tourist attraction. The Iron Boy is loved and cared for by the locals. During the long and cold Swedish winters, locals often hand-knit tiny woolen scarves and caps and dress the Iron Boy to keep him warm. In summer, it's common to find him with flowers or tiny leis. Sometimes you'll see him wearing tiny Barbie doll sunglasses. You've probably noticed the coins around him. People leave coins for good luck. Additionally, there is a legend that if you pat his little head 3 times and make a wish, it's sure to come true within a year. By now, it was time to start back. We rode the bus back to Nynäshamn, where we reboarded a lifeboat and returned to the ship. That night, we were again treated to a magnificent sunset. Maybe not quite as good as the one we saw the evening we left Tallinn, but still great. The next day, August 6th, was a final at-sea day. During the day, Robin attended a cooking demonstration that included a tour of the ship's galley. We arrived back in Copenhagen on the next day, August 7th, my birthday. After getting off the ship, we were taken directly to the airport. From there, we caught an Iceland air flight to Reykjavik, and then to Boston, where we spent the night. The next morning, we boarded a United flight and flew directly to LA, arriving on August 8th.